In 1958, German multinational pharmaceutical company Schering introduced a new hormone pregnancy test in the UK under the brand name Primodos. Other brand names include Amenorone Forte, Guest Test in the USA, and Duganon in Germany. Hormone pregnancy tests were said to provide a quicker, cheaper, more reliable and convenient way to test for pregnancy. The women who went to see their trusted family doctor, unsure if they were pregnant or not, were given 2 pills, usually taken over 2 days. If a period was induced, then the pregnancy test result was said to be negative. If no bleed occurred, the test was positive. For many women, the joy of learning they were expecting a new addition to the family was soon to be severely tainted. Pregnant women, given hormone pregnancy tests, gave birth to children with profound congenital malformations, that is, at least the children who were strong enough to survive the assault on their development. Although exact numbers are impossible to know, it is estimated thousands of miscarriages, stillbirths and infant deaths resulted in the first 3 years since Primodos was introduced. In stark contrast to the promises of convenience, ease and safety, these drugs caused the women who took them and the children who survived a lifetime of horrendous pain and suffering. Another drug, called thalidomide, caused a similar tragedy. Released around the same time as Primodos, thalidomide was supposedly introduced to combat the anxiety and morning sickness associated with pregnancy. Instead, thousands of babies had their lives stolen before they even began. Many died in utero. Those who lived were sentenced to a life of disability and hardship similar to the hormone pregnancy test survivors. In America, the FDA refused thalidomide license for use, mainly thanks to this woman. Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey blocked the drug's approval and requested further studies due to safety concerns in the face of intense pressure from pharmaceutical giant Richardson Merrill. In 1962, Dr. Kelsey received the award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service from then-President John F. Kennedy for her role in protecting the public from this dangerous drug. Despite the FDA block on thalidomide, 2.5 million doses were handed out to 1,000 doctors across the states for testing purposes. Several hundred pregnant women were given thalidomide. Many of the children born with abnormalities still survive today. Although thalidomide was withdrawn from the UK drug market in 1961, it was already far too late. Approximately 2,000 babies were born with severe deformities. In regards to Primodos, it's impossible to know precisely how many women and children were affected. Many doctors handed out hormone pregnancy tests to their patients without writing a prescription or keeping any record of administering these drugs whatsoever. What we do know is in that 1 year alone, more than 25,000 Primodos samples were given out to GPs. Schering's own sales data shows hundreds of thousands of doses provided annually to UK clinicians. Throughout the 1960s, numerous doctors and patients contacted the regulator to express concerns about the effects of Primodos and other hormone pregnancy tests. Their objections fell on deaf ears. Until, in 1967, Dr. Isabel Gall published a paper in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. Dr. Gall's study showed a possible causal link between Primodos and birth defects. Dr. Gall also wrote to Dr. William Inman, head of the Committee for the Safety of Medicines, the UK medical regulatory authority at the time. Initially, Dr. Inman was dismissive of Dr. Gall and her findings. However, eventually, reluctantly, he decided to perform an official study himself. Dr. Inman waited a full 8 years before publishing the interim results of his study. In that time, countless families had their lives torn apart by the outrageous disregard for human life demonstrated by the medical industrial complex. During the 8 years Dr. Inman was publicly silent, he was in constant communication with Primodos manufacturer Schering and other doctors who showed more concern for the pharmaceutical companies than the damage caused by these drugs. In correspondence recently discovered in the National Archives of Germany, we see Dr. Inman chose to warn the pharmaceutical companies to take necessary precautions as legal action was possible. In 1977, a decade since Dr. Gall raised the alarm, Dr. Inman finally published his report confirming a link between hormone pregnancy tests and birth defects. We found out later from the Berlin archives that Inman failed to mention he found a statistical probability of 5 to 1 that a pregnant woman who took Primodos would give birth to a malformed child. From the archive documents, we also find out that Inman destroyed all the evidence collected during his study. Following Inman's confirmation of an association between hormone pregnancy tests and congenital deformities, Shearing withdrew Primodos in 1978. A 2-decade-long chemical attack on women and their unborn children finally came to an end. But the battle for justice was only beginning. Public and political pressure led to a court case filed against Shearing by the newly formed Association for Children Damaged by Hormone Pregnancy Tests. Shearing's management met in secret at Leeds Castle to discuss how they should handle the case. Shearing knew that although negligence could be established by the complainants, without definitive proof that the chemicals in Primodos caused damage to developing babies, they would likely escape prosecution. Scientifically speaking, establishing causal proof of how drugs work in the human body is notoriously difficult, if not impossible, in most instances. Predictably, Dr. Inman appeared in court as a witness for Shearing, rather than the people he was supposed to be responsible for protecting. Due to a lack of scientific evidence in support of the case, the judge presiding, Justice Bingham, could not uphold the association's complaint against the drug manufacturer. Thankfully, Justice Bingham refused Shearing's request to dismiss the case and granted the Association of Families the right to come back to court should new scientific evidence become available in the future. After the legal case was effectively paused in 1982, a quiet period on the investigative front followed. Until, in the mid-2000s, new evidence came to light, thanks to research conducted by the surviving children. Now adults in the digital age, their efforts attracted new media and political interest, rejuvenating the stalled fight for justice. The research unearthed more damning documents from the first legal challenge a generation ago. In 1982, a British lawyer requested documents from Shearing for a court case in Germany that in the end did not go ahead. The prosecutor of the case stored the documents in the National Archives in Berlin. It became clear from these records and the Inman letters mentioned earlier, which were discovered at the same time, that Shearing conducted minimal safety precautions. The tests they did conduct were carried out in 1969, a full 10 years after Primodos was released, and were far from comprehensive. Shearing performed 0 safety trials before releasing Primodos, and no toxicology study, a minimum standard required for new drugs before they're made available to the public. The journalists investigating previous legal cases found that in the 1970s, US drug company Squibb were successfully sued by a survivor of Guess Test, the American brand name for Primodos. As part of the settlement agreement reached between Squibb and the family affected, no further legal action was allowed, and the details of the case were kept out of the public eye. In 2006, German international healthcare corporation Bayer acquired Shearing in a $20 billion deal. Along with Shearing and all its holdings, Bayer also bought any future liability for damage caused by Shearing's products. As the second decade of the new millennium got underway, the revived campaign to raise awareness and seek justice gathered pace. And in 2012, the Association of Families elected a new chair. Marie Lyon is a mother affected by Primodos and has been a vital driving force in the association since its founding and the first legal case in the early 80s. Marie is also a tireless, tenacious fighter who took on the enormous challenge of leading the association in their struggle against the government regulators and one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world.
I received a telephone call when my daughter Sarah was 8 to ask if I had a daughter or a child with a disability, and my immediate response was, "Why are you asking?" And the answer was, well, because we believe that the disability that your child has could have been caused by some tablets. Did you take any tablets? And I said, no, I didn't. And then, of course, when they asked, well, what happened when you went to the doctors? I'm afraid it was just immediate. Oh my God, he gave me 2 tablets. And I just said, well, surely to goodness, they can't have, been any link to what happened to her. And the response was, well, do you know what's in them? Which, of course, I didn't ask. And that's when I found out they were 40 times the dose of an oral contraceptive. Because when she was born, her arm was missing from just below the elbow. And in place of the hand, there was like a tiny palm with tiny 5 digits on it, where obviously to just stop growing. So again, I had the same reaction, shock and then guilt. Why on earth did I not ask about it? In 1978, would I be interested in joining the association, which had just started, and trying to fight to, find out what had happened, which of course I said yes. And that made me more determined. Well, you know what? We will make sure that we fight for these people. We've now grown to over 400 families, because originally we had 800 members. There are thousands more out there, I'm absolutely positive. Yeah.
1,100 families must be a tip of the iceberg.
Of course it is. And this is where we do want to try and get in touch with those families, because it's very important that they're given the opportunity to find out what happened to them and why.
Marie hit the ground running, and thanks to her hard work researching, raising awareness, lobbying and leading the association's members, modern-day political support began to take shape. A crucial milestone was the creation of the all-party parliamentary group on hormone pregnancy tests, chaired by Yasmin Krashi, MP, who had been a champion of the association's fight for truth for some years. In 2016, consistent pressure from Marie, the all-party parliamentary group and the families affected forced the government's Commission on Human Medicines to set up an expert working group tasked to review the facts about Primodos. The expert working group sat for almost 2 years before publishing their findings. Their report, when it was finally published in 2017, was shocking, to say the least. The group of government-appointed experts decided that there was no direct causal link between hormone pregnancy tests and birth defects. Their report effectively pardoned Bayer Shearing and absolved the regulators of any wrongdoing. In the opening sections of the report, it states clearly that their remit was to establish whether there is a possible association between hormone pregnancy tests and congenital malformations, not a direct causal link. The expert working group report, which so many survivors and campaigners had waited so long for, was a complete whitewash. The clear disparity between the expert group's remit and the conclusions of their report raised more than a few suspicions amongst investigators. Sky News journalist Liz Lane submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for the correspondence between the expert working group and the MHRA, the UK's current medical regulator. When the information request was eventually fulfilled, what was found in the emails between the two supposedly separate agencies was just as disturbing as the report itself. The emails, with names redacted, showed that the MHRA influenced not only the direction of the expert working group investigation, but also guided them to change the purpose of their investigation and to look for a direct causal link, which all parties knew they could not find. Just like in the 1981 court case, the role of the regulator was made crystal clear for all to see. A government body meant to protect public health, in reality act as an agent for big business interests and their government enablers at the expense of truth, justice, and even our lives. In defiance of the glaring cover-up, the resurgent battle to raise political and public support continued. The time the survivors had long waited for, results of new scientific studies into the effects of hormone pregnancy tests, had arrived. In 2018, at the University of Aberdeen, Professor Neil Vargason administered Primodos to zebrafish embryos to see how their development may be affected. What he found was astonishing. Not only did Primodos cause malformations in the fish's growth, but it also seemed to directly target the same physical systems as in the human survivors. The fish embryos studied displayed deformed spines, fins, and eyes. Professor Vargason's study also showed that the earlier Primodos was introduced into the embryo, the more profound the damage became. Later the same year, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, Carl Hennigan, requested the data the expert working group based their report upon to conduct a review. After many months and multiple follow-up requests, the evidence was finally provided. Professor Hennigan and his colleagues came to a very different conclusion. The Oxford team of scientists found a clear, indisputable association between hormone pregnancy tests and congenital disabilities. Both sets of peer-reviewed, independent findings gave new hope to the association's members following the obvious official efforts to protect Bayer and the regulatory establishment from blame. As the burden of evidence provided by genuine scientists hit critical mass, and the public and political cries of outrage at the blatant cover-up reached fever pitch, then Prime Minister Theresa May, who had up to that point been towing the official line, parroting the expert working group's fraudulent findings, caved into pressure and ordered a new government review. The publication of the Baroness Cumberledge Review, entitled First Do No Harm, in 2020, marked an important watershed moment for the survivors of hormone pregnancy tests and their families and supporters. After so many years of heartache, an admission from the government that they failed in their duty to protect the public, and a long overdue apology to the survivors was an important step towards justice.
Julia Cumberledge, for me, actually just, pinned it to the wall when she said there is enough evidence to show that there were failures and that 1967 should have seen the withdrawal of the drug.
If there is any doubt in your mind as to how high the cover-up of this tragedy goes, I've got a final document to show you. Remember Dr. Inman? As well as head of the Committee for the Safety of Medicines, he was also a consultant to the World Health Organization from 1966 to 1980. Inman's letters to the WHO show that they were not only aware of the Primodos travesty, but were deeply involved in keeping the drugs on the market and helping the drug producers prepare for court. In this letter, from a company called Girling, Shearing's insurer, we see the high-level medical establishment behind-the-scenes preparation for the first legal challenge they knew was coming, thanks to the warning Dr. Inman gave them while performing his 8-year study. At the end of the letter, Girling requests to be included in the conversation with the UN as they wish to form a judgment of the risks. It is important to point out the risks they're referring to are not the same risks faced by the trusting mothers and their unborn children.
But we do have a wonderful team now, a legal team, originally from America, called PGMBM. They'd asked to meet with me because they'd heard about the case. And immediately the response was, we want to take it on. We really believe that you have a case to answer and we want to represent you. So that's where we are at the moment.
What also do people need to know about how they can help if they want to?
The way that they can help is basically to support the group. And that could be either by signing the petition, writing to their MP. That would be absolutely wonderful, and I'd be more than happy to send a prototype that they could use. We need to make sure that the recommendations from Baroness Cumberledge are implemented. That is key to any kind of improvement in our National Health Service. It is also key to making sure that the regulatory system is literally, decimated from top down and rebuilt without prejudice, without any kind of conflict of interest, and with absolute open scrutiny on all the decisions that are made.
Although headway has been made towards establishing fault and legal remedy, challenges still lay ahead. To this day, not a single individual involved in the cover-up or those who acted to keep the drugs on the market for so long have been identified as responsible. It is now beyond doubt that many doctors, pharmaceutical company executives, board members, national regulators and international health bodies were all well aware of the dangers posed to the unborn, while they actively colluded to ensure hormone pregnancy tests were given to as many women as possible. If you think that you or someone you know may have been affected by hormone pregnancy tests, please do not hesitate to reach out to the association. Please consider helping the association's fight for justice in any way you can. Links are in the description box below. Every like, comment and share helps move the battle forward a little bit at a time.